have a little look at the weave design that you also have with your bag with no name pattern. Now, I've already prepared this, but it's easy enough to show you how to do this. Now, obviously, your weaving needs to be done on a fabric that is non-fraying, so faux leather, real leather, cork, or in some instances you could probably, I've never tried it, but you could probably do it on oilcloth, but don't quote me on that because I haven't tried it and it's not something that I would necessarily think would be my first choice. So what have I done? I've cut my flap panel and I've cut it to the pattern size, and I've, on the right side, I've marked centrally down the middle of my flap so that I know that I'm centering my design. I've taken my design and I've cut the bottom off 1.5 inches from that bottom line. So I've just taken off that last little strip of paper because I want my design to start effectively 1.5 inches up from this edge. And I've lined up my centre line on my design with the centre line on my faux leather. And then I've stuck it in place, and I've stuck it in place with a bit of masking tape, decorator's tape, whatever you like to call it. So let's talk about craft knives. I've got hundreds of craft knives. And you can get these little things which are like a pack of 5, come from your local DIY store. The blades are not removable, so once they're blunt, you throw them away. You get things like this, which are, they're all right. They're a bit wobbly. I find that the blade's a little bit wobbly in the holder, but when the blade gets blunt, you just break off the top snippet. It's got little sort of striations across, and you just break off a bit and then go to the next one. I don't mind them, but they are a little bit flimsy. I prefer something like this, which is a slightly more durable craft knife. It's also got a nice handle. It sits nicely in my hands, and this one, the blade can be replaced. Now, I actually start each of these projects with a nice new blade, so I'm just going to take the old blade out. I'm going to pop it into my hold on a second, I've got a sharps box here. It's not a sharps box. For anybody that, if you've got pins or anything like that, I use one of these. It's a what are they, smelly things that go in your washing, and it's got quite a nice wide lid. Pop my sharps in there, pins, needles, anything else, and that just goes away. It actually gives a nice little waft whenever whenever I open it up. So let's get my blades out, my spare plates. Is that a single blade there or two? Because sometimes they get stuck together. No, I think that's a single blade. I'll just slot that back in and tighten it up. Now, using a nice clean fresh blade will give you nice clean fresh cuts. So it's not difficult to do this. All we're going to do is all of these black lines on your template, we're going to make the cuts. Now, some people like to use their a ruler to make sure they're straight. I don't, I freehand. So I just put the blade in and pull the blade towards me. Try not to go any further than the end of the cut. This doesn't take long to do. This isn't a complicated weave. I've started you with a really basic one so that nobody's terrified, but the basic ones are really quite effective when they're done. So, you know, for a first time weaver, and I do love weaving. I know I've done weaving on lots of my bags in various different techniques, because there are lots of different techniques for weaving. And this is what I would call the starter weave, shall we call it. Now, if you've got arthritic hands or poorly wrists or anything like that, you may find that this is quite a challenge to do, and you may wish to sort of do a bit, walk away and do a bit more later on. What I would suggest is I always do it line by line, because that way I know that if I need to go have a comfort break or get a cup of tea or answer the door, or just let my wrist kind of get over the shock of having to push a craft knife through layers of faux leather, I know where I've stopped, so I'll get to the end of each line. And once I've got to the end of the line, if I'm going to stop, I'll just make a mark to show where I need to sort of start. So I just put a little, just so that I know, just a little arrow to show where I've got to, because actually looking at it, it's quite difficult to see where you've already cut. I'd walk away, come back, and I'd already have an idea of where I'm at. So I'm not walking away in this instance. I'm just going to keep going. This one doesn't take too long to cut. As I say, some people like to use a ruler to cut their cuts. I find that the more things I've got on my table, the more confused I get. So I just find it's just as easy to do them freehand like this. I'm always cutting towards my body, so pulling the blade towards myself. And with a nice sharp blade, it shouldn't be too difficult. If you feel that you don't want to do this on the front of your work, you can always fit your template to the back of your work. I would, however, say that if you do that, you might need to give an extra sort of push as you cut through. This is the knife is going through the vinyl plasticky part on the front of the faux leather first. If I do it this way, if you've got a particularly heavy woven back on your faux leather, it's sometimes easier to do it from the back, because your knife will be cutting through the fibres on the back first. And the only thing I would advise is that you need to use fairly sturdy faux leather for this. So the really thin sort of dress weight won't work, and the very stretchy sort of nappa leather stuff that you can get won't work. It just isn't stable enough for weaving. There are no restrictions to what you sort of the backing or anything else like that. There are no restrictions, full stop, really. It's just what's advised, what I would advise you to use. I've tried all sorts of weaving, and say the thinner, stretchier faux leathers just don't work very well. It's not impossible to do, but you don't get a great result. Cork works really well as well. Looks lovely. And I've done some faux leather, some real leather weaving as well, which looks quite cool. Let's just, you want to try and only do one cut. You don't want to be sawing. You don't want a sawing action. You want to get one cut that's clean and goes right the way through. So stab the point of your needle in to start your cut, and make sure that you're going through all of the layers. I would also advise you do this on a separate cutting mat than the one that you use for your main cutting board. This is a little one that came from, I'm not sure, it might have been Aldi's or Lidl's or one of those sort of places. It wasn't expensive. And this is what I tend to use for cutting for weaving, because this will chop up your cutting mat in a way that nothing else has ever chopped anything up. So, you know, you'll ruin your cutting mat doing it. So, you know, my wrist is starting to ache a little bit now. And it's because you're just putting constant downward pressure. So take it slowly. And if you do need to stop midway, then do so. You can also, those of you with cutting machines, you could digitize this and make it into an SVG file if you wanted to, and cut it on your machines. I'm not going to do that for you. I do have a machine. I've never used it to cut a weave design. In fact, I'm probably going to sell it, because it was one of those things that I thought I needed. So I got one, and I've used it twice in a year, so didn't really need it after all. It just takes up space that I don't need. So there we go. That's the completed cuts made. I'm going to remove my template. This is the bit where you go, oh my God, I've done all those cuts and there's nothing to see. But I promise you there is now. I'm just going to turn this over because it's got the right side on the other side. And if I gently pull, Well, I don't know if you can actually see that or not. But you can see perhaps there, the cuts are all there. Yeah, you can see it. I just wasn't sure if you could. The cuts are all there. They kind of close up as you... I haven't got a scarf. I haven't got a cardigan on today, so I'm going to go for use my scarf instead to get rid of that chalk mark. But all of our design is all on there. So I'm going to go away and get my weave strips because I've left those in the other room, and I'll come back and show you how we start weaving. Okay, so I've cut my weave strips. The design has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so it has 10 horizontal lines of weaving. I've cut myself long strips, so basically I'll weave through and then I shall just cut them to size. You can use any scraps of faux leather, you could use ribbon, you could use bias binding, 1/4 inch bias binding if there is such a thing, I don't know. And my weave strips are just shy of 3/8 of an inch, so they're a little more than 1/4 of an inch, a little less than 3/8 of an inch, so I think you could say that was sort of 5/16 of an inch, I guess. And I'm going to start from the back, and you just need to find the first, I generally do one line at a time, so find the first sort of hole on the first line, and from the back you can just push your, and I use a little screwdriver, but I use a pokey tool to push my weave strip through that first hole. You need to be fairly gentle because there are fairly small gaps between these holes. And we're just going to pull it through until there's approximately an inch or so just sticking out of the top on the back. I'm going to turn it over. And I've got a tiny little bit of faux leather on there that's caught on the sides. I'm just going to trim that off because I don't want it to catch. And as the name weaving would imply, we're going to go in and out of the holes that we've created. Going from the front to the back, taking it gently. This doesn't happen quickly. Once you go through the hole, pull your faux leather right the way through. You don't want to be going through several holes and then pulling through all of them because you'll just tear the faux leather. There are very small gaps between the faux leather, between the cuts on this particular weave, only 1/8 of an inch. So you don't want to kind of pull it and mess up your weave design by tearing your faux leather. And basically that is it. You're just going to do the same thing on each of the strips, going from the top down to the bottom, trying not to miss any of the little holes that you've created, the little cuts. This is a fairly simple design. It will take a little while for you to do, but it won't take long. So you could use 1/4 inch ribbon if that's what you prefer to do. It needs to be, again, a non-fraying material to do this because you don't want to, it's just going to have raw edges all up the sides if you're not careful. And you don't want that. That's just going to look untidy, unless that's the look you want. I mean, I thought about this as I'm saying it, and I'm actually thinking you could probably do strips of denim, and that would look really cool because it would fray at the edges. But I've never done it, so there you go. There's an idea if anybody fancies it. But you'd have to put it through, your main fabric would have to be a non-fraying type of fabric. So I'm just going to carry on to the bottom of this row. Now occasionally you will get a little fibre. Just, I can lift that up. You can, I don't know if you can see, there's a little fibre there that's just pulled out from behind because my faux has got a sort of a woven back. You can just snip those off. Once it's all woven together, you find that it won't actually fray. It's only as you're pulling the strips through that you sometimes get a little bit of fraying from the backing fibres of the faux leather. It really depends on what your faux leather is actually backed with, because they are all slightly different. If you plan on doing this and you've never used faux leather before to sew with, please do bear in mind that you may well get some, there will be some thickness. This is thicker than fabric, and when you're sewing your flap onto your bag, you will be creating quite a thick seam. So if you've got a slightly more basic machine, you may struggle to actually put the bag together once you've made your beautiful flap. So you have to think of the sort of the whole picture. But you can use this weave design on anything, on any flap, on any bag. The only thing I would say is to give credit where credit's due, to say where the weave design came from. Now, for those of you who sell your bags, please do, you're very welcome to make to sell from this pattern. It would be appreciated if you could name the pattern when you're selling, so that people could come and get their copy if they want to. And give credit to me, you know, it's only fair, but that's very much your personal call. I can't enforce that. There we go. So that's my first line of weaving completed. And I'm just going to do exactly the same thing for each of those lines. So I'm going to fast forward you now until we get to the end, and I'll show you how to do the rest the next. Okay, so there we go. I've finished my weaving. I'm just going to trim off any stray threads that I've got that have come through from the back when I've been pulling the weave strips through. And that does happen sometimes, so you do just have to kind of check. The other thing is that sometimes I just like to put, take my awl and just kind of use it to straighten out some of those little bits that are across the weave strips. Sometimes they get a bit caught up on the side if the faux leather is sticky. It sometimes catches on things, so it just helps to straighten things out. I'm quite happy with that. That looks good. I'm pretty pleased. Okay, so now we have a couple of options for how we finish this. Obviously our strips are not secure in there. They're not attached to anything. When they're fairly tightly in the weave holes, but they're not attached at all at the back. Now you can, if you want to, lay a piece of woven fusible interfacing across the top of the whole thing and then press it, which will hold those in place. I would be very careful doing that, because sometimes doing that can just kind of take the fullness out of the design. Or you can top stitch all the way around the outside, which is my preferred method, just because I like to top stitch, as you already know. So taking a long thread on the top and the bottom, I'm going to start on this side, and I'm going to top stitch initially 1/4 of an inch away from the side of my design. Coming up the side here, I'm not going over anything apart from that one single layer of faux leather, because it's not until I get to the top here that I've got all the layers of faux where I've got my weaving strips. Let me just move that across a little bit, sorry, so you can see. And again, you can choose to do this in a self-coloured thread or a I'm just hand cranking it because I literally am following the design. Not because my machine won't go through it, just because I'm a little, I just want to make sure that I'm quite literally following the design of my weaving. Now, hand cranking, there's no problem with hand cranking your machine. If you feel that that gives you more control, and in this instance, because I'm wanting to kind of watch what I'm doing very carefully, I'm not quite ready yet, not quite right yet. You know, hand cranking is not an issue. Or if you feel that you can control your machine, just one stitch at a time. Not everybody can do that though. I know that's why I tend to hand crank, because I think everybody can hand crank. Not all machines are overly responsive. 1, 2, 3. Let's just, I think we can go one more. To stitching like one stitch at a time. So you can see we're just going to go around the outside of the design, and that will secure all of those end pieces from our weaving strips in place. So you can use a piece of woven fusible interfacing. You could even use a little bit of duct tape on the end of each of the weave strips to hold them down, or glue underneath the end of each of the weave strips, which I've done before. I just think it looks quite nice if you're brave enough to top stitch. I think it looks quite cool. And if you're not confident in your top stitching, then use a self-coloured thread so that it's not quite as obvious. So if you do go a bit wobbly, it's not like, oh no, look, I've ruined my weaving because my top stitching's not great. I am aware, say, that not all machines are easily controlled to the point where you can literally do one stitch at a time. I've done a few classes with people that are doing free motion quilting who've said, oh, my machine doesn't do that. When I say, you know, go slowly, my machine doesn't do that. And some machines only appear to have one speed, and that's super fast. So if you can't control your machine stitch by stitch, then hand cranking is definitely the way to go around the fussy bits of this shape if you choose to do the top stitching. Lots of options. So once you get to the end, if you can finish in the same hole as you started, then ideal. If not, then just before. And I'm just gonna, that's better. Just gonna take those threads, and it shouldn't be any big surprises now what we're going to do with them. And I'm going to bury them into that last hole that we stitched, taking them through to the back, pulling the front threads and the bobbin threads nice and tight so that I know there's no little loops on the front, and tying them off. And now I can trim off any excess weave strip that I might have. And now I've got a lot of faux leather confetti. And there we have, our weave design is complete. You can see how that's going to look fabulous on the front of your bag. Let me just grab our bag and you can see. Let's move that strap out of the way. And let me just kind of position this where it should be. And there you go, look. How cool does that look? Pretty lovely, eh? So, are you brave enough to give weaving a go? Give it a try.